How's it going, crypto community? Welcome back to the Chris Larson, Stephen Thomas Talk at Google. This is part 7. If you haven't seen the previous parts, please be sure to go back and watch those so that you can be caught up with what we're actually going to be talking about in this part. Real quick, also, before we begin, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that subscribe, especially if you're looking for XRP related content, and also ring that bell so you can stay up to date with all my XRP related content. And if you appreciate this video and the content within it, please be sure to also hit that like. Without further ado, let's jump right into it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for coming. My question is around, so if you're talking about that XRP and cryptos are the internet of money, the big difference between money and data is that money is regulated, and banks certainly, if they were the equivalent of running the phone lines before, have a pretty big incentive to innovate and sort of get ahead of a change that is coming. So you could see them easily upgrading the SWIFT protocol to be able to move money internationally a lot quicker. And so I'm curious how you guys see specifically XRP living in a more regulated space. I think, crypto sort of took the world by storm, and governments are going to certainly respond the next year or two. So why do you think that XRP is going to be able to live in a much more regulated industry than data is, especially because you could see banks upgrading SWIFT to be able to support, maybe sub-minute transactions instead of transactions that take days?
Yeah, I want to quickly question some of the premises in there. So I think a lot of the people in the room, I think, are very young, and so we grew up after the deregulation of data. So the internet came out, and a lot of the laws that were around before then, copyright law, cryptography laws, export restrictions around algorithms, things of that nature, actually got removed, and their safe harbors got created because the internet kind of posed a technology that was, on the one hand, very useful, and on the other hand, kind of in a legal gray area. So I think that the technology, just if you use it, it just feels so incredibly useful that it's hard to imagine how regulations wouldn't be built around it. I think that there's definitely an opportunity for people to be thoughtful and intelligent about how they approach the technology in the meantime. You want to be compliant, you want to do everything that you can to kind of stay within the letter of the law, but there are going to be ambiguities in terms of just the law is not written for these kinds of use cases. So I think that's one thing. And then as far as XRP, I think I'll hand it off to Chris.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising, obviously, a key part. And as I mentioned before, the Internet of Value is kind of equal parts capital, technology, and compliance. Compliance is hugely important. And the reason is simple. I don't think it's just because governments sort of want to have a monopoly. I think it's actually a question of, data is powerful, but money is more powerful, right? Data can show you, a life-saving medicine that your family might need. It can't buy it. Money can buy it. On the flip side, data can encourage a terrorist to do something awful. Money can buy the weapons, right? So the stakes are higher, which I think actually this is going to have maybe a more profound effect on Earth, good and bad. So regulators have got to be there every step of the way. This fantasy that somehow this is going to bypass governments and bypass compliance, you know what? That's just BS. And you know what? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. That is a champagne problem with a bunch of rich young people that can sit there behind their computer screens and block out a lot of bad things that can happen. So it just can't go that way. And so I think we're trying to think about that, try to be pragmatic about that, because that's the only way we're going to have impact. And if you look at people that are trying to support what's going on in the developing world, they are very much wanting to work. They're not trying to go around. They're trying to work within the system because they know that's how you're going to have impact. So that's kind of the way we see it. Your question about SWIFT, by the way, the problem with that point of view is SWIFT only deals with the data. They have a correspondent banking partner that deals with the value, and that's off any sense of an Internet of Value. The whole point here is that something like Interledger and XRP can eliminate the correspondent, which is actually where all the juice is, right? That's where all the waste is. That's where the settlement risk is. That's where the failures are. That's where the time is. So SWIFT actually doesn't have the combination of capabilities to do what you're saying. Sorry.
So, no, SWIFT is not a threat, as many of us have witnessed over the last year and a half as Ripple has gone and poached some of the largest partners of Swift, right? Moreover, there is also the fact that Chris just kind of got a little like peeved in regards to like the notion that these assets can survive outside of a regulated bubble, right? Um, the way he he kind of pointed out, it's like if these things aren't regulated, things are gonna go get ugly really quick, really quick. They could be terrible, and they really could. It could be very dystopian if we don't regulate this thing, because money is power, people. If you don't understand this basic concept, first off, what the hell are you doing investing? Like what? No, but like seriously, money is power, and power corrupts. And if your power is unchecked, that corruption will corrupt you entirely, and you will abuse that power, just as anybody who gets power that is unchecked will abuse their unchecked power. It's human nature, as vile as it may sound. None of us, no matter how noble any of us may believe ourselves to be, if put in that position, it's human nature. We want to be on top, especially men. We want to be on top of the pecking order. If you put us in a position to be on top, you will have to kill us to get us off of the top, right? And when you have a lot of money, it's really hard to kill somebody, because it's really hard to kill them when they've got 5, 6, however many people hired to kill you before you get to them, right? So, what he's pointing out is, there's this massive potential for benefit to society, but if they just let the anarchists run away with this and don't actually come at this space with an iron fist and regulate it and ensure that everybody's meeting compliances, then it's gonna get ugly. It's gonna get really ugly, for whether you're a holder or not. Whether you hold cryptocurrencies or not, it would get ugly in that scenario, because again, when you get back to the concept of unchecked, unfeathered power, even if you are one of the people with a lot of Bitcoin, if there's another bigger fish than you, guess what? They'll make you dead. That's how it works. Look at how it works with the United States as the current global superpower. They go and invade anywhere they want, and they don't give two craps what anybody says, because it's money for them. It's money for our government. That's what the military-industrial complex is. It's a way to bolster your nation's economy through stimulus programs that are then bled into the economy through the areas that you're stimulating, i.e. the Boeings and the Lockheed and Martins and so on and so forth. The same thing would happen, only in a privatized world. If you remove the ability for governments to control money, then private individuals will control the money. And then you'll have the same thing, only it'll be kind of similar to kings and queens of the of the Renaissance and pre-Renaissance, because they're individual private landowners instead of a land or a nation that is democratically organized or even remotely free. You wouldn't. People don't think about how good we have it, because even though the American government and many governments around the world are corrupt and they have their problems, the thing that most people seem to miss, I feel, is that despite all their flaws, these systems are the only reason that we have it even half as good as we do now. And we being the average person, not the oligarchical elites that rule our world. But enough of a tangent here. Let's jump back. What's our next question here?
Sorry, thank you for the question.
That's a pretty cool demo, and I just wanted to learn a little bit behind the scene, like for example, the AI, who built the AI, how the money goes to the AI chatbot.
Okay, so we built a protocol that kind of takes Interledger on the one side and takes HTTP on the other side, and essentially you're making REST calls, so you're making API calls to these backends, and the first time you make the call, they'll respond with 402 payment required, which is a sort of an error code in HTTP that was already reserved. We were like, great, that works for our use case. And basically, it sends you back a header that tells you all the information that you need to know to make interledger payments to that exact endpoint, or the API server that runs that endpoint. And so that server will be listening for interledger packets in addition to the HTTP requests. And so when you start paying, yeah, it'll go back into that same receiver, and then the receiver will then credit your, what we call like a token. And then the next time you make a request, it has in the header your token, and so the receiver will know that you've actually funded that with some packets, and then you can proceed through the program. The streaming version of the demo that you saw, that's a little bit more complicated. This probably goes a bit beyond, but we can maybe catch up about it later. And then one thing that's also interesting is that one of the services, which is the thing that builds a static site into a Docker container, actually itself pays another API, right? So you have another API behind that. And so one of the things that's really cool is with these streaming payments, we can actually have sort of an API that takes in money and then immediately spends it as it's trying to process the request, and then maybe sends a little bit as profit to the developer, and then returns the result. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it.
Great, thanks.
Sorry for the pause there. I couldn't get to my unmute button here. So, yeah, that was basically him breaking down how this payment system operates. Obviously, as he was saying there, I believe that was the question for his website. I couldn't honestly understand that gentleman's question. Like I caught bits of it, but he had a very thick accent, so I couldn't actually catch the actual question. Apologies. But the idea, I believe that's what he was addressing, because that seemed to be what Stefan was talking about, is how the how the payment actually works under the hood on the on the Codease browser, right? So, with that, we have now finished part 7 of the Chris Larson and Stefan Thomas talk at Google. I hope you've enjoyed. As always, if you have and you haven't already, smash that subscribe if you are a new member here, and also hit that like so I know that you enjoy these deep dives. And also, ring that bell so that you can be notified when the final part of this series comes up. And it's going to be a little bit longer because we only have 12 minutes left in the video, and I want to make this an 8-part series, so it's probably going to be a 20-minute finale. Hopefully everybody's ready for that. So, as always, I've been Jade Martian. You have been watching The Martian Report, and I cannot wait to see all you my XRP Martians in my next video on Mars.